What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. You like the set? Well, you better get used to it, because you'll be seeing it more. The sun is setting on Generation 7. Well, and the moon, I suppose. The 7th generation of the Pokémon franchise is coming to a close. Several different people have already shared their thoughts that we've spent in this part of the world over the past few years, but I thought I could share my own impressions. It just seems like yesterday that the reveal trailer came out for Generation 7, and we didn't have a lot to go on. It just gave us some concept art, a wireframe model of Pikipek, and it revealed the titles. And almost immediately people started doing their research. They were looking at the yellow fire trucks with the rainbow license plate and putting all the facts together to realize that this region would be based on real-life Hawaii. And soon we came to know this region as Alola. It was by far the most stunningly beautiful Pokemon region we had ever seen to date. If you need proof, just look at the realistically proportioned humans in the overworld. And that's something that can't be overlooked in Gen 7. There were so many tiny changes to the games, and some of them might have even gone unnoticed. After you had encountered a Pokemon for the first time, you would then know exactly what its strengths and weaknesses are. And if you decided to catch that Pokemon, you had the option of putting it in your party directly instead of automatically sending it off to the PC. HMs, which were always a complaint among certain fans, were basically removed. There were still obstacles that were blocking your path, but you were not forced to sacrifice team viability to overcome them. And even with the Let's Go games, we were given for the first time visible Pokemon in the wild. You didn't have to run into them randomly in the grass. If you wanted to, you could avoid an encounter before it ever started. But of course, there were other things on the other end of the spectrum that were a detriment to the experience. Those wild encounters we were just talking about in Let's Go, they weren't even wild battles. You just had to try and catch the Pokemon by hurling ball after ball, which was to the aggravation of many fans. Not to mention the restrictions on the decks limiting them to only the originals again. Although that might have just been to mentally prepare us for what would happen in the Galar region. But perhaps the most common complaint for Let's Go and the Alola games was that they were too easy and that they held your hand far too often. And there is some merit to that. The number of cutscenes in Alola bordered on obscene. I remember one time specifically, I believe it's when you first get to Ula Ula Island, and you sit through an extended scene and they finally give you back control of the character. But after taking only 2 or 3 steps, you immediately get thrust into another scene. What is the point of giving me control back if you're just gonna rip it away first thing? Just make it all part of the same thing and run one scene into the next. I think a little less of that and a little more free exploration would have undoubtedly made this one of the best regions in the Pokemon world. Since Alola shook things up a lot, largely with the inclusion of island trials instead of gyms. This added a lot of character that other regions simply couldn't have. These trials, as well as totem Pokemon, allowed you to use your skills in an entirely different way. It provided a wholly new experience, so I'm sure I'm not the only one that did struggle somewhat with these unknown quantities. But Generation 7, while looking great and playing incredibly well, was also the second generation in a row to have very few new actual Pokemon. X and Y had less than 100, which was the minimum before then, but then Sun and Moon did the same thing by having very few Pokemon exclusively native to Alola. Unless you count regional variants, which was a great idea in my book. Much better than some of the other one-off gimmicks that they've done before. But even then, there's not that many original creatures that were brought to the table. And of course there are more questionable aspects of Gen 7, like Z-moves. It's a fine idea, in theory, basically just give Mega Evolutions to Pokemon attacks, but have anyone be able to use them. But the execution on that was a little dicey. It took about 3 minutes to watch the animations, and I wouldn't really know, but apparently, according to some other people, Z-moves did no favors for the metagame. Not to mention the wholly separate issue of the Festival Plaza that nobody wanted to use either. Another aspect that divided fans was Ultra Beasts. Some people really like the ideas and concept, but even those that do admire these Ultra Space Titans can admit that they sort of overtook the narrative a little bit. And with the legendary Pokémon, they make up a disproportionately huge section of the Pokédex. But shiny hunting in the Ultra Wormholes was kind of fun, so maybe it balances out. And another part that could be considered contentious in this generation was the anime. I've not heard so many people have negative things to say about the show since the Best Wishes era. But that might have more to do with the makeup of the show being changed, with Ash at a school most of the time with a large group of friends, instead of on a standard journey with just 2 or 3. Not to mention that he didn't even have a full team of new Pokémon at any one time. But I guess that's another byproduct of their fears of being too creative and making too many new Pokémon. And another big limitation of the generation might just be the lack of variety in the games themselves. We got the first Sun and Moon, which were great, but then all we got besides that were more of those, which some people would argue are the definitive versions, but even then, that doesn't stop it from being repetitive. And the only other stop we made in our time here was the one place that we've been to more than any other in our years in this world. So I could easily see how some people might have been underwhelmed by this generation, essentially only having 1.5 regions. But, for me personally anyway, Gen 7 was a great time, because it's when I started my YouTube channel. I've always loved Pokemon since it started, and I've always had my own thoughts and ideas about it, but not until Generation 7 did I dare to think that I could measure up to some of the other greats out there. And starting with Sun and Moon has brought me all the way from my very first Imperial to the tens of thousands of people that we have in this community now. So I could not be more thankful for Generation 7, helping to launch an empire that will only continue. And I can only hope that we'll have the same kind of growth in the next generation. All in all, I guess you could say that Gen 7 was a bit of a mixed bag. You'll have your complainers and you'll have your defenders, but the truth is that there are both good and bad parts to it. The games, even though occasionally choppily paced and without conventional challenge, did play the best out of the entire series. So I'll be very interested to see what history makes of Gen 7 a little bit further down the line, when we've had some time to reflect. What did you think of Generation 7? Let me know down in the comments. Also, be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And I'll see you all in Generation 8.